All rise, the bailiff's voice boomed through the crowded courtroom, making every spine shiver. Shoes scuffed on the shiny floor as everyone rose, and the ensuing quiet was almost palpable. This wasn't the production of a reality show. This wasn't the neat world of edited television. This was raw, unedited, and actual. At the center was Kody Brown. For years, millions had observed him on Sister Wives, the red-haired patriarch who constructed his celebrity on family, religion, and the polygamous practice of plural marriage. On TV, he was boisterous, assured, even arrogant. But here, in this courtroom, his shoulders slumped, his eyes darted around the room with nervous glances. And for the first time, Kody seemed small. He saw people he knew in the courtroom. Some of his wives were present, but not all together. Robin, his lawful wife, sat towards the front, arms folded tightly, her expression unreadable. Janelle, Christine, and Mary sat further back, apart not only by seats, but by years of shattered trust. Behind them were reporters waiting to chisel the day into headlines, and beyond them interested passers-by, fans who had watched him for years, looking forward to observing how this real-life soap opera would play out. The gavel hit wood. "You may be seated," the judge ordered. The crowd complied. Kody sank down into the defendant's chair, each motion weighted. The judge's tone was firm but steady. "Mr. Brown, today you are not an actor on a television show, not a celebrity, but a citizen. The law is the same for everyone. Do you get that?" Kody nodded. His bravado was absent. This wasn't about camera crews or ratings. This was about survival. The allegations were convoluted. For years there had been struggles within his family over houses, money, and responsibility. Accusations of squandered money and arguments over who owned what had reached a fever pitch. Issues of legal custody and duty to his numerous children could not be avoided. What had initially appeared to be the staged plot of a reality show had now spilled over into the stark environment of the courts. The prosecutor stood up, her tone crisp and firm. "This is not a case about religion. It is not a case about personal belief. It is a case about accountability, about keeping families from being destroyed by chaos, about fairness." She produced a thick file and opened it. "And the evidence will prove that Mr. Brown has not met the responsibilities that are required of him." Gasps filled the air. Reporters wrote feverishly. Fans whispered among themselves, some aghast, others smiling as if they had known this would happen all along. Kody's attorney rose swiftly, slicing through the commotion. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you have before you is not a criminal. What you see is a man who chose to live differently, a man who fathered 18 children, a husband who, far from perfect, attempted to create a family with faith and love." His voice became louder, practically defiant. "This is not a trial of right and wrong in the ethical sense. This is a trial of freedom. The freedom to live, the freedom to believe, the freedom to love." For an instant, the courtroom relaxed. Even those who had arrived ready to find Kody guilty were remembering the years they had seen him laugh with his children, construct houses for his wives, and stand up for his family before skeptics. Maybe he was not a criminal. Maybe he was only a man torn between faith and law. But the prosecutor did not rest. She thumbed through pages of testimonies of financial disarray, property conflicts, broken promises. "This is not a matter of freedom," she replied frostily. "This is a matter of control. This is a matter of chaos. This is a matter of the numerous individuals, wives, children, even supporters, who have been left hurt, perplexed, or abandoned. Mr. Brown did not construct a family. He constructed a system in which only his say counted, and when that did not work, neither did anything else." The words hung heavy in the air. Kody shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening, his eyes darted toward his wives, hoping for some sign of support. Christine looked down, avoiding his gaze. Janelle pressed her lips together, her face stoic. Mary's expression was unreadable. Only Robin met his eyes, but her look carried worry, not strength. Witnesses testified. Accounting records were read into evidence. Tales of mismanagement, of behind-scenes battles, of promises made in the shadows of glory, all poured out in the light. What was once rumor on message boards or gossip on social media was now revealed under testimony. Kody's attorney responded with fervor, depicting him as a misunderstood man, a man of faith who had given up everything to pursue his convictions. He spoke of Kody as a father, of one who had loved his children fiercely, of one who had labored endlessly to care for them, even under the oppressive burden of public attention. This is not the tale of a criminal, the attorney insisted. This is the story of a man who lived differently and is now being punished for it. The courtroom was divided. Some nodded, moved by the defense's words. Others crossed their arms, unmoved, convinced that the truth was harsher than the lawyer's portrait. Hours passed. The air grew heavier with every testimony, every argument. The crowd leaned forward, hungry for answers. At last the judge raised his hand. Silence fell instantly. This case, he started, is not solely about one man. It is about the conflict between personal freedom and the rule of law. Mr. Brown has taken an unconventional path. But this court does not prosecute belief or lifestyle. What it cannot help but notice, however, are the repercussions when those choices lead to conflicts, confusion, and injury. The room stood still as the judge issued his verdict. Kody would not be sent to prison, but the verdict set severe limits on his future, legal parameters about property, financial management, and responsibility to his children. It was not absolute loss, but it was far from win. The gavel came down. Court is adjourned. The room was in an uproar. Reporters hastened toward the doors to write up their articles. Supporters and critics debated angrily in the aisles. Some cried that justice had been served. Others vowed that freedom had been stomped on. Kody stood slowly, his face pale but calm. Cameras were banned inside, but outside a tempest brewed. He knew headlines were already being typed out. He knew the world would soon be arguing his name again. As he left the courtroom, the doors swung open to pandemonium, blinding lights, screaming reporters, microphones shoved into his face. He said nothing. He offered no response. He kept going, eyes straight ahead, his face impassive. Behind him, the angry voices of fans and critics waged war like thunder. Some described him as a victim, a man punished for being different. Others described him as reckless, a man who finally had to confront the repercussions of his decisions. But one thing was certain, this day had changed everything. The self-assured man who audiences knew from Sister Wives no longer existed. In his place was someone who had stood before the cold, unforgiving face of the law and emerged forever changed. And even though the verdict was absolute, the argument would continue to flare. Was Kody Brown a wrongfully judged man by society? Or was he merely a man who had created an empire of family and religion that couldn't hold up to the scrutiny of reality? The response would have varied depending on whom you asked. But one thing was for sure, this courtroom fight would not be soon forgotten. It would endure in headlines, in hushed tones, in arguments over dinner plates. And for Kody Brown, it would be the chapter that defined not only his TV legacy, but his life itself. The air inside the courtroom was charged, heavy with unspoken drama. The courtroom was packed. Some had come out of curiosity, some to judge, and some simply because they'd lived alongside Kody Brown on their television screens for more than a decade, and wanted to see the man who refused to edit his way out of adversity confront something he couldn't delete. Reporters filled the benches with notebooks at the ready, pens clicking restlessly, while a sketch artist's pencil danced rapidly across paper to record the lines of Kody's serious face. The judge removed his glasses and looked down at him. "Mr. Brown," he declared, voice deep and measured, "today you are not famous. You are not a figure in a reality show. You are here as a member of this court, bound by the laws that we all obey. Do you get it?" Kody nodded, but the confidence that had always characterized him had vanished. His bravado, his passionate proclamations of faith, his defiant stands in defense of his family, were nowhere to be found. He appeared diminished now, hemmed under the glare of the fluorescent lights and the gaze of strangers who would judge his future. The prosecutor rose, a thin woman with piercing eyes that shot like arrows as she reached for her file. Her heels clicked as she walked slowly, purposefully. "Your Honor, members of the court," she started, her voice sharp. "This case is not one of religion. It is not one of personal choice. This is one of responsibility. This is one of the abuse of trust, the intertwining of finances, the conflicts that have become too much for any family to bear. And it is about a man who has employed his celebrity as shield and sword." It was an electric atmosphere within the courtroom, the sort of tense silence that had each cough, each rustle of paper, ring out like thunder. All the benches were occupied. Opposite sat observers, die-hard fans who had stood up for Kody Brown for years. Across from them were skeptics, the critics who had always thought his lifestyle would eventually implode under the weight of itself. Sandwiched in between was a line of journalists pecking anxiously at keyboards, salivating for headlines that would shatter the internet in minutes of the ruling by the judge. Kody sat at the defense table, fists clenched in tight fists, knuckles pale. He glanced toward the gallery. He spotted Robin in the front row, eyes fixed rigidly ahead, lips pursed into a tight line. Janelle sat behind her, her face closed, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Christine sat forward, elbows on knees, eyes cast down as if she didn't even want to be noticed. And Mary, once the initial wife, once the pillar of the family, sat in the back, her eyes far away, apart as if she were watching a tale that no longer represented her. The judge leaned forward, his tone firm. "Mr. Brown, the court reminds you, you are not here as a TV personality, not as a man of religion to be put on parade. You are here as a citizen. The law does not distinguish by faith or fame. Do you grasp this?" "Yes, Your Honor," Kody answered. His voice dropped lower than normal, nearly subdued. The prosecutor stood up, her file thick with paper and highlighted lines. She proceeded to the middle of the courtroom, her heels clicking rhythmically like a metronome. "Ladies and gentlemen," she started, her tone crisp, but on command. "This is not a religious case. This is not about whether a man can love more than one woman. This is about consequences. It is about shattered promises, muddled finances, custody battles, and the harsh reality of what occurs when one man seeks to live beyond the rules that bind the rest of us." The room buzzed, whispers weaving through the benches. The bailiff put up a hand for quiet. The prosecutor went on, opening her file. "Through the years, Mr. Brown has said that he leads with love, that he supports 18 children, that he struggles to meet the needs of multiple wives. But the picture that the evidence will reveal is a different one. A picture of economic disarray, of homes left vacant, of children in the middle. This is not liberty. This is dysfunction." Kody adjusted in his seat. His attorney leaned over, saying something hastily, cautioning him against reacting. But his jaw clenched. He had defended his family for years against outsiders, against critics, against strangers who wouldn't get it. Now the same arguments felt useless here in this cold, sterile courtroom. The gallery responded in waves. Some gasped, some nodded, some averted their eyes, ill at ease with the prosecutor's brutal words. A woman in the rear row grumbled, "About time," and another whispered, "They're twisting it all." The judge's gavel banged once. Order in the court. Silence settled back, thick and waiting. Kody's attorney finally stood, adjusting his tie, and turned toward the jury box. "What you see here is not a criminal," he asserted. "What you see is a man who had the courage to live differently. A man who had 18 children in the presence of America. A man who made errors, yes, but who always acted with love." His voice strengthened, more fervent. "Mr. Brown has been tried by the public for decades, but this courtroom cannot confuse belief with guilt. This is not a trial about faith. This is a test case about whether one man's lifestyle renders him unsuitable in the eyes of the law, and we will demonstrate that it doesn't." For an instant, the room relaxed. Even those who had arrived prepared to judge him paused. They recalled the seasons of on-screen smiles, the scenes of family dinners and birthday parties for children. Maybe this was not so clear-cut. Maybe Kody Brown was just a man caught between worlds, the world of individual freedom and the world of the law. But the tension didn't dissipate. If anything, it became thicker, because everyone knew that the true battles had only just commenced. Kody's attorney stood firm in the middle of the courtroom, his voice ringing off the walls, growing stronger with each word. "You have heard charges." He turned for a moment toward the prosecutor's table, "but what you need to hear now is the tale of a man who never meant to hurt anyone, a man who constructed something remarkable, though unorthodox. A man who has already been tried and convicted in the court of public opinion." The controversy wasn't merely legal, it was cultural. Talk shows argued about whether the Browns were pioneers or opportunists. Churches chimed in, some excoriating the decision as a moral mistake, others justifying it as a right to religious freedom. The rest of us, too, were having conversations about family. Those couples who lived together but did not have marriage licenses started to wonder, if the Browns get to decide what family means to them, why not us? Gay couples who continued to fight for acknowledgement in some states made the comparison to the Browns' fight. Isn't this also about love? The Browns were more than just stars on reality TV. They were symbols. Even as so many rejoiced, critics spoke out. Some maintained the ruling was an error, that it would mainstream acts they felt were destructive. Others said while the Browns weren't abusive, the ruling could inspire groups that were. Social media exploded with divided opinions. This is freedom. Let people live the way they want. This is dangerous. What's next? 5 husbands, 10 wives? Why does the government care who someone loves? This is not about love, it's about breaking laws. The Browns had won legally, but in the court of public opinion, the battle raged on. Even as the Browns celebrated victory, they realized that the wounds of the ordeal could never heal completely. They had endured months of terror and anxiety. They had had their private lives under the most intense scrutiny, their children had been pulled into tabloid headlines, and their romance had been handled like trial evidence. Kody acknowledged later that the ordeal had transformed him. "You can't go through something like that and not be different," he said. "It made me stronger, but it also made me realize how fragile freedom is." The wives, too, carried the weight of the battle. Christine once shared, "We won, yes, but I'll never forget the fear of thinking my family could be taken away from me. That fear will always be part of me." The Browns' courtroom victory didn't erase controversy, but it did ignite a movement. All over the nation, increasingly, individuals were questioning the boundaries of the law and personal relationships. Documentaries, news programs, and books started to look at polygamy in a way they never have before. Some depicted it as risky, others as misconstrued. Either way, however, the discussion had begun and wasn't going to end. The Browns had compelled America to ask an uncomfortable question: who decides what a family is, the people within it, or the government? When Kody Brown emerged from that courtroom, he was no longer merely the face of Sister Wives, he was the face of a much larger battle. A battle about choice, law, and what family means in America. For others, he was a rebel, defying laws to gain an advantage for himself. Regardless of the viewpoint, his place in history was undeniable. He had taken his family's private struggle and lived it in front of cameras and brought it to the attention of the law as a case that transformed the law's perception of families like his. To this day, individuals continue to argue the Browns' legacy. Was Kody Brown a trailblazer for personal rights, or a man who merely wished the law to curve around himself? Did the ruling signify progress, or was it a slippery step backward? What is true is that the Browns saga remains to generate debate. Whenever their program is shown, whenever their name goes viral on the internet, those same old questions come back. What does family mean? What does freedom mean? And who decides what they are? Maybe the strongest aspect of the Browns' legacy isn't the decision itself, but what it taught us. That love, with all its messy, imperfect, complicated forms, is more powerful than fear. The courtroom might intimidate them, the law might test them, the world might judge them, but ultimately, their solidarity sustained them. And that solidarity, that resistance in the face of judgment, became the beacon of their struggle. When the gavel came down and the Browns left court in victory, they didn't win merely for themselves. They sparked something. They made a nation reconsider family, challenge harder questions about freedom and love. The verdict was not just legal, it was cultural, it was emotional, it was personal. And as history recalls that day, one thing becomes certain. The Browns' struggle wasn't simply about polygamy. It was about something much deeper: the right to live, love, and define family on your terms. Janelle contributed her view, peaceful but assertive. "We're not here asking the government to legalize multiple marriages on paper. We're just asking to be left alone. We pay our taxes, we raise good kids, we live in peace. Isn't that what counts the most?" Mary acknowledged the difficulties. "Yes, it's not always easy, but no marriage is easy. Our struggles are no different from anyone else's. Jealousy, finances, balancing family time. The difference is, people see ours as illegal. But to us, it's just love." And then Robin, the youngest wife, gazed straight at the judge. "This family rescued me. It provided me with stability, a home, and a father figure for my kids. To dismantle this would not only devastate us, it would devastate every child who relies on this family for love and direction." Their testimony wasn't refined legal statements, but it didn't have to be. They were raw, emotional, and unmistakably human. And then it was Kody's turn. He stood up straight, but those who were around him could see the burden he bore. This was not just about defending himself, it was about defending every single person he cared for. "My wives selected me, and I selected them," Kody explained sternly. "Not due to compulsion, not due to force, but due to the fact that we love one another. We are not criminals, we are a family. My children should be able to grow up without the threat of losing their parents just because the state doesn't approve of the way we live." He stopped, allowing the words to sink in. Then he said the line that the reporters would be quoting for days. "Your Honor, this is not about bigamy. This is about liberty. If the government can say how many wives I can have, then what else can it say about what we do in our private lives?" Silence filled the room. The judge listened intently, sometimes making notes. From the bench, it was evident this wasn't a simple case. On the one hand, the law was clear. On the other, the Browns weren't the kind of individuals the law intended to prosecute. The issue was weighty. Should the court rigidly enforce the law, even if that broke up a peaceful family? Or should it uphold the Browns' rights, even if that relaxed the law meant to keep other groups from being abused? Each face in the room appeared to take a breath, waiting. Witnesses later said the courtroom was charged, like a play in progress. It wasn't all about legal jargon. It was all about human feeling. There were instances when the prosecutor's words appeared to cut through the Browns' equanimity. There were instances when the passion of the defense caused people in the audience to cry. And there were instances when the quiet was so palpable, you could almost hear the thudding of anxious hearts. The Browns sat together, their hands occasionally reaching for one another, as if drawing strength from their unity. No matter what happened, they wanted to show the world they were more than individuals. They were a family. To the outside world, this trial became a symbol. It wasn't just Kody Brown on trial. It was the question of what family means in America. Was family legally defined as one husband, one wife? Or did family exist in the context of love, even if that love defied traditional structures? The Browns' defenders regarded them as pioneers of individual liberty. Their detractors regarded them as subversives who were attempting to twist laws to fit their agendas. Either way, one thing was for sure: the Browns had put the spotlight on a problem most preferred to overlook. As the hearing days dragged on, the Browns sensed the pressure building. Each and every word uttered in court could seal their fate. Each witness could influence the verdict. The kids, too, bore the burden. Although they weren't in court daily, they had a notion of what was on the line. Some were mature enough to grasp the danger of losing their dad. Others only felt the fear expressed in hushed tones and prayer at night. For the family, this wasn't merely a battle in the courtroom. It was a battle for their own survival. One reporter later put the mood into words. It wasn't a trial of numbers on a page. It was a trial of hearts on the line. And that's what made it so memorable. The Browns weren't saints. Their family had flaws, fights, and weaknesses like every other. But in that courtroom, their humanity was on display. Tears were shed, voices broke. Occasionally, even the lawyers had a hard time controlling their own emotions. It was not just law, it was life. Once the arguments had concluded, the Browns could do nothing but wait. The gavel hadn't fallen yet, but already the trial had altered them. For Kody and his wives, the courtroom had transmuted from a source of terror into a theater where they announced to the world, with every shred of their strength, that their love was true. And no matter what the judge decided for or against them, one thing was sure: the Browns would never be the same. The Browns had sat in that courtroom for weeks, listening, waiting, dreading the worst. Each new prosecution argument seemed to cinch the noose tighter. Each point of law reminded them that the state could rip apart all they had constructed. At one time, even the whispers from the gallery were filled with an ominous sense of foreboding. Journalists were speculating on what might happen. Some believed Kody might be charged with a crime. Others speculated that he might lose custody of the children. The thought that the Browns' family was about to be torn asunder by the law was unthinkable to those who cared for them. For a time, it really did seem like they might lose everything. The tension was nearly unbearable. Christine later characterized it as living with a storm cloud over our heads. Janelle confessed that each morning felt like waking up to an alarm before a funeral. Hope sucked out, fear building. Even Kody, self-assured and vocal as he was subdued. His eyes weighted with what was hanging in the balance. And then, just as the walls were closing in, came that moment that altered everything. The defense had been waiting for this very moment. They knew the law favored the prosecution, but they also knew something essential, something the prosecution had glossed over. Kody Brown wasn't married to 4 women, legally. On paper, he was married to only one of them, Mary. The others were spiritual marriages, ceremonies of love and faith, to be sure, but not marriages that were recognized by the state. And if the state didn't recognize the unions, how could it criminalize them? The defense stood, their tones firm, and fell back on the argument like a hammer. Your Honor, my client has only one legal wife. The others are personal, religious vows. It is not within the state's authority to dictate to a family what terms they are allowed to use to define themselves. To punish Kody Brown for referring to his spouses as wives would be to punish free speech, free exercise of religion, and the right to create family relationships without government interference. The courtroom changed in an instant. Even those who didn't agree with plural marriage leaned in, recognizing the force of this argument. the prosecution attempted to resist. They claimed that the law wasn't simply about forms, it was about intent. If a man asserted multiple wives, they argued, he was trespassing on the spirit of the law, if not the letter, but the defense pressed on. What's next, they inquired. Is the state going to criminalize individuals referring to one another as husband and wife if they are not wedded? Will people who live in stable long-term relationships be persecuted because they decide to cohabit as a family? This case is no longer about polygamy, it's about liberty itself. The ripple effect was instant. Spectators started murmuring. Reporters took furious notes. Headlines the following day sported such lines as, "Game-changing argument," and "The Browns discover a loophole." But for the Browns, it was not a loophole, it was reality. For Kody, that moment was like resurfacing after almost drowning. He knew that no matter how others perceived his lifestyle, the state could not eliminate what wasn't documented. Only one of his marriages was lawful. The others existed in the realm of the heart and soul. And although critics mocked that observation, arguing it proved the wives weren't really wives at all, the Browns did not share their perspective. To them, marriage was considerably more than a legal document. It was commitment, love, family, and no court could take that meaning away. The turning point didn't only shift the legal fight, it altered the mood within the courtroom. For weeks, the Browns had entered with slumping shoulders, cautious eyes, but following this argument, their shoulders squared. Their features relaxed. You could glimpse hope rekindling. Christine would later report that she whispered to herself at the time, "Maybe we're going to be okay." The wives started to think that they could walk out of the courtroom hand in hand, not torn asunder by the law. Even the children, too young to understand the specifics, could feel a shift at home. The hushed conversations that went on after midnight became subdued laughter. The frightened sighs became prayerful thanks. This wasn't just about Kody Brown anymore, or even about the Browns as a family. The courtroom battle had become something much greater. A symbolic battle between law and freedom, tradition and change, government authority and individual decision. The issue was no longer, is Kody violating the law? It was, can the government prosecute love that isn't on paper? And that question had consequences far greater than the Browns. Couples who lived together but never had marriage licenses. Individuals in long-term relationships having children who were never legally bound to one another. Even gay couples in states that at the time still refused to approve of their marriages. The case of the Browns had inadvertently burst open a far more extensive discussion about what constituted a family in contemporary America. For the prosecution, it was a crushing blow. Their best arguments depended on the notion that Kody was thumbing his nose at the law by having more than one wife. But if technically speaking he had only one wife, then what were they prosecuting? Could they actually bring a man to court for words? For beliefs? For love? The prosecutors doubled back, asserting that to permit the Browns' way of life would invite more extreme groups, ones that compelled teenage girls to marry or used religion as a pretext for exploitation. But the defense was prepared. They directly pointed to Kody and his wives. This family is not a cult. They are not abusers. They are not criminals. They are consenting adults bringing up children in a loving home. To equate them to criminal organizations is not only unjust, it is unfair. The press went wild. News anchors debated the ramifications. Legal analysts picked apart the breakthrough on nighttime television. Some observers took the Browns' side, labeling the case a milestone in the struggle for individual liberty. Others maintained it was perilous, cautioning that relaxing polygamy laws would be catastrophic. But whether people believed in the Browns or not, everyone had one thing in common: the Browns' case had turned around. What appeared to be defeat now seemed to be a winning chance. The Browns held on to each other at home more tightly than ever. Kody united his wives one night after court and told them, "We might not be out of the storm yet, but for the first time, I can see the sun." Mary confessed to crying that evening, not with fear, but relief. Janelle, the practical one, reminded everyone that fights weren't won until the judge's final decision. Christine smiled despite her jitters. And Robin, the baby wife, whispered that perhaps, just perhaps, this was their opportunity to prove to the world that love could endure even under fire. As the trial continued, the courtroom wasn't so much a cage as it was a stage. The Browns weren't just defending themselves anymore, they were testifying for every family ever told, "You don't fit the mold." Their testimony became a declaration. Their struggle became a symbol. Their love became a defying of the law's very limits. By the time the defense had rested, the mood of the trial had completely shifted. The Browns weren't viewed as rule breakers anymore. They were viewed as a family trapped between old-fashioned laws and new concepts of freedom. And that was truly the turning point. The question left hanging in the air wasn't whether Kody Brown had violated the law, it was whether the law was violated. Regardless of what the ultimate decision would be, the Browns had already won something significant. They had changed the conversation. They had reminded the world that love could exist beyond the definitions of the law, and that families could flourish in ways society didn't always comprehend. The Browns were no longer just reality TV personalities. They were unwilling pioneers in a cultural and legal revolution. And as they exited the courtroom that day, heads held ever so slightly higher, they knew one thing for sure: this battle was no longer theirs alone. It was a battle for every family who was brave enough to be different. The courtroom was quiet. The atmosphere was heavy, weighted with the accumulation of all the testimonies, all the arguments, all the moments of terror that brought them to this point. Kody Brown sat with his wives, their hands held together, their eyes on the judge. Reporters held poised pens, families muttered prayers, and critics leaned forward, waiting to hear the verdict of a man whose life had been entertainment and controversy. And then at last, the gavel came down. The judge coughed, rearranged his papers, and gave the decision that would not only transform the Browns' lives, but ring out across America. The court had ruled Utah's anti-polygamy statutes, at least as they had been enforced against the Browns, were unconstitutional. The state could not charge them for simply cohabitating as a family, nor could it jail them for using the terms husband and wives when only one was on paper. The words fell like thunder. For the Browns, it was not merely a victory in court, it was staying alive. The specter of being separated, prosecuted, and shamed had been removed. For the first time in years, they could catch their breath. Kody's eyes filled with tears as he looked at his wives. For so long he had borne the weight of whether his decisions would tear the very family he struggled to defend apart. Now that weight was eased. "This is not a victory for us," he said to reporters after leaving the courthouse. "It's a victory for every family that has been informed that they do not belong. We are here, we exist, and we will not hide." Those words traveled far and wide, landing in headlines, ringing out on TV screens, and going viral across social media. Love him or despise him, Kody Brown had made history. At home, the Browns partied the verdict the only way they could, beneath one roof with dozens of children, tears, and laughter. Christine later recounted the moment as "the first time I felt like the law wasn't against us anymore." Janelle characterized it as seeing the storm clouds finally break apart to reveal sunlight. Mary, who had been married to Kody the longest, confessed that she sobbed for hours. Not with fear this time, but with gratitude. Youngest wife Robin hugged her children and whispered, "We're safe now." For the children, the decision provided security. No longer would there be whispers of losing their father. No longer would police cruisers be expected to arrive at their doorstep. They could simply be children once more, raised in a home with both turbulence and affection. But the impact of that decision extended far wider than the Brown family. Legal experts quickly broke down the ruling. Some praised it as a milestone in individual liberty, a bold move toward recognizing that the state has no right to regulate how adults constitute families. Others feared it was a bad precedent, one that could muddy the waters of marriage law and provide an opening for groups that could use plural marriage to legitimate abusive practices.